All right, we're going live, but we're going to wait for YouTube, LinkedIn. I'll let you know when it happens. I'm tracking both here.
There's nothing quite like this.
But David and Richard, you both look really cold.
I'm a bit under the weather, as they say, so I'm wrapping up with whatever is available around the house. And then in
YouTube's
20 minutes
live.
I'll be sweating.
Yeah, YouTube's live. We're just waiting on LinkedIn. But a bit under the weather because you are, of course. All right, here we go. We are live on LinkedIn. So, welcome to the Shit Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name's David Coe.
I'm Richard Bussolato, today in the bottom left of your quadrant.
And my name is Joe Augustin. Welcome to the Shit Show. And today we're going to talk about something that everybody's trying to get more of. And while they're doing it, they're destroying the world, perhaps. Who knows? Yes. Money. The Shit Show is all about the poly crisis, the meta crisis of simultaneous occurrences of several catastrophic events all happening at the same time. It used to be the stuff that you had to wait for a big movie to come out with as a premise, but nowadays it's just the way we live our lives. Usually we have someone join us as a guest for a diverse point of view. Today it is just the four of us, and we are going to get, I guess, as into it as quickly as possible. We might investigate what's happening with Richard, who is dressed as though he's in the Arctic right now.
Yeah.
Elf costume.
I have been better, and it's the result, I think, of too much traveling, which I don't particularly enjoy anyway. So it serves me right to be in this state, I think. But I will try to preserve my voice for some theory debate later on in the show.
Yeah, we need you today because we're going to get into the money conversation. So I just realized there was a typo in the title. It's just money. But we usually start the season just the four of us. But sometimes I think we lose our space to have the conversations that we really want to have, and we go through some of the really big news stories too quickly, and don't always have an opportunity to address them in detail. And the money conversation is something that I think we're very fortunate to have David and Richard here, and then Joe in a different way, who actually understand it. So I'm going to be the stupid person. Well, I'm not stupid person, just
never be the stupid person.
The average person, because I think of, what does all of this mean to a pensioner? What does it mean to my mates? What does it mean to people who are just going into a mortgage? Or, there's so many people at various stages in their lives who don't have the insight that you guys have. And I think it's important knowledge. So we're going to talk about that. But before we do, we'll get on to the things that we're not going to talk about. You guys ready? And there's a lot.
It's a lot.
More than usual. And I don't send this to the guys beforehand, so this is always a surprise. Now, the first one, I've said we're not going to talk about it, but there is a chance that we might want to talk about it. And that is the devastating fires that are happening in Hong Kong as we speak. I mean, the fires are apparently out and the recovery is going on, and there are hundreds of missing. So this is a devastating fire. They haven't had anything like it for decades. The initial reaction was shock, and now they're moving into anger. And there's a lot of information in the public sphere already about what went wrong. So this is going to be huge. We're also not going to talk about the shooting of 2 National Guards in DC, or the fact that the shooter had approved asylum under the Trump regime, even though they accused Biden. RFK Jr.'s love poems have been released, and I actually think we know far too much about the sex lives of too many political people in the world today, and I really don't need those images in my head, and I don't think any of us do. So I hope that changes. Trump continues to call female reporters horrible things. The recent one was ugly. I'm wondering if all female reporters in DC need to become or get Mar-a-Lago faces to be accepted by Trump. But the recent one was basically talking about his health, and it was co-written with a man, but he had there was no mention or physical attack on him. The BBC is self-censored again, and it's enraged historian Rutger Bregman. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. I'm 50-50 on him as a thought leader, but he claimed that the BBC cut a line from this lecture, this very famous lecture that he delivered, in which he described Trump as the most openly corrupt president in American history. And interestingly, even when BBC is reporting on the story, they're also censoring themselves with that line. So that's a big one. Nigel Farage is a racist, but he never intended to hurt anyone. And interestingly, I just saw Reform are now significantly slipping in the polls, so in the numbers. So that's good. Peter Thiel claims that the Pope is the Antichrist. I would consider maybe more projection. A Thai lady was nearly cremated, but then it turns out that she was alive when they heard her gently knocking on the coffin. Jair Bolsonaro, obviously the former disgraced president of Brazil, attempted to escape, and he said he was having hallucinations due to a change in a drug regime. And that's what caused him to put a soldering iron on his ankle bracelet. So he's now firmly in prison. And the map showed that he's about a 15-minute drive from the US embassy. And Trump was recorded as saying, before he actually knew that he'd been captured, saying, oh, yeah, we're going to be catching up very shortly, I believe. So interesting. Meta is under fire for hiding casual evidence of social media's harm. This is actually a really big story that's worth keeping an eye on. And it's been compared to how the cigarette companies hid their own research. And finally, X turned on its location feature, which has outed several high-profile MAGA accounts as foreign actors. So their motivations are different depending on where they're coming from. Some are just actively trying to sow division in American society, and they're certainly succeeding, or they're just making money because they've got blue tick accounts. And if you get enough attention, you can make money from X. So, yeah, that's the stuff we're not going to be talking about. Anything you guys would add based on what you've seen on the agenda?
No, we have so much to get into and stuck into. So I think, yeah.
David, did you want to talk about the Hong Kong situation?
Well, I mean, it's like a horrific fire. So I think I don't know much to talk about at the moment in that sense. Apart from the fact that it's a tremendous tragedy, I think it's going to be a difficult sort of situation. I don't know to what extent, the news we hear from here, people talk about the scaffolding and because it burned, therefore it's a problem.
Yeah, the bamboo's being blamed, but it's more that they put this these covers on the windows that were not fireproof, and that's where the focus and the wrappings, the fabric.
Exactly.
But so being married to a geotechnical engineer, we have interesting conversations about stuff like that. So it's it's a big story.
I thought it would come up actually in terms of just being a money story as well, because that really is
exactly
behind what happened. Basically, they were saving $40 a piece, I think, on that material that they were using. And of course, the scaffolding is a traditional aspect of Hong Kong. I mean, that's it's just the way it's been done for the longest time. But I did think that how it might relate to our usual discussions is actually the role that perhaps the weather played as well in terms of having scaffolding dry out the way it did. Although the counter argument is they had the counter argument is they had a typhoon recently as well. So it's it's one of those things. It wasn't like a dry spell, so it can't be taken to be that as well. But the understanding that I have is that it was it's been there for a very long time, so it's actually very old scaffolding, and therefore because of that, it's also going to be the way old stuff happens. It gathers a lot of things in it that can help to help the kindling as well. So it was not a great situation, and linked to money as well. Just one of those things where I think the residents have been complaining for the longest time to try and get something done about the place in terms of renovations, and finally they did start the work, but they never really got going with the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Steve just said the tragic fact is everyone gets paid to take shortcuts or look the other way. It happens everywhere. It's not just Hong Kong or an APAC problem. And I mean, he sees that, and the saving money thing. It's a big part of it.
The clear response from here in the UK is Grenfell Towers. That's kind of the first thing that comes to people's mind when you see of that. So I think it does expose some of the things about just how we build, and the comments about the mention of the fire and the kind of, there's been, I don't know if it's exactly the weather conditions and so on, but effectively I have been thinking, onto what we talk about is that, if you think about whether the facts of kind of drying out and then you may have a typhoon afterwards and so on, it's very much that actually the drying out doesn't make the wood or organic materials much more likely to burn. You can soak it afterwards, but then they still kind of decompose somewhat, and then you've got materials that will burn once you get it hot enough in that same way. And the way really to think is, no matter what it is, climate change is like having to carry a backpack full of stones around you all the time. One way or another, it's going to drag you down, and that's basically this. It's a carry and a negative one that you have to have around you, and you really have a choice on that. Even if it's a comparatively light pack, after 50 kilometers of walking around with it, you're going to get more tired.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy, and just sort of saying, that there's so many different ways of looking at it. Like Joe, I didn't even think about it from the environment perspective because I'd been looking at the technical side of things. But it's interesting. All right, so Richard's keen to go. His throat's working for now.
So far, so good.
Yeah. And so what we want to really talk about is really focusing on the sort of the wider implications and the impact on the economy, and its impact in our pockets. Now, some people really get this. That's what they do. People like David and Richard study this. Joe knows it in a different way. And for me, it's just about working out, I make decisions that I know make sense based on what I can see coming. I don't share that information with people. It's just, I'm not going to buy a house in a floodplain. I'm not going to buy a house in a place that's going to be too hot to live within the next 5 years. I know those things that are coming, but the majority of us, I was listening to a conversation around hypernormalization. Have you heard that term?
I have heard that term.
Yeah.
I'm not totally at ease with what it encompasses, but I've heard the term and I think I can guess.
Yeah. So basically, we exist in a world where we're watching another world exist that completely ignores what we see happening, right? And so even when people are personally impacted, they still plan, live, talk like in the next 20 years, life is going to be a better version of what we've got now, whereas the science is not indicating that at all. And the reality before our eyes is not indicating it at all. I'm sure the people in Thailand who've just basically, there's bodies floating around in houses that they haven't even found yet, right? So that's just basically denying reality before our eyes, but also holding on to the dreams of the future that we want, no matter what's changing. So it's I'm trying to understand the mindset of what's going on, because it's hard, right?
There was a friend showed me this video, YouTube thing, and I'll try and dig it up and kind of we can have it to share at another time. And it was by sort of Marsha Linehan, who created this sort of therapy called DBT, it's dialectic behavioral therapy. And it was on radical acceptance. And it's basically radical acceptance is to accept reality as it is. And it's very much for kind of people who suffer from anxiety, extreme sort of anxiety and worries, and kind of into particular types of mental disorder that you get as a result. And it's very much of actually saying, yes, you have all this pain, but you have to accept the fact that you actually do have all this pain, rather than try to kind of somehow avoid accepting that. And accepting it doesn't mean that you then go and you're defeatist in feeling that actually I have to somehow feel that I deserve it or anything of the kind. It's nothing like that. It's a very factual type situation. And then what you're describing now is this aspect where we refuse to accept the reality of today.
Yeah.
And therefore, we're constantly bargaining it away. We're constantly denying it. We're constantly trying to do things which ultimately hurt ourselves more because we cannot actually be prepared for anything that happens.
Yeah.
It just reminded me of that. And that's really good video. I will try and find that link. And
Yeah. Yeah, it's a term in the spiritual world, radical acceptance. You mentioned it last week, but hypernormalization is another way of thinking about it, learning about it. Because we know, if I look at the current devastation that's happening right now, it's impacting a part of the world where personal insurance rates won't be very high, just like we saw in Jamaica. So it's not going to take out the insurance industry, but all we need is the insurance industry to be taken out by something enormous, which destroys the banking industry, which destroys the pensions, which means the economy is absolutely in total free fall, right?
Well, it's much rougher than that.
We're not there.
Insurance accounts for, the reason why you can go along and buy something on the web and just sort of tick the goods and pay or whatever it is, or you go into shop and you do all those things, is because insurance is behind all the potential payment failures. And so the insurance industry underlies the whole thing. And if you think about the level of debt in the world, the reason why that's supportable is because there's layers and layers of insurance behind it. So
insurance and fossil fuels are sort of parallel underneath, keeping it all together.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think of what would happen as a result of the difficulties and the cost, is that the areas where there's mandatory insurance by regulations, those premiums will go up. The areas where it's actually an important thing to have, but it's not actually regulated, then you're going to find that people won't be able to afford it.
And it won't even be possible anymore, right?
And the industry itself will just pull away from those things. So the industry will do well because there's plenty of places where you have to buy insurance. You're actually required, as law, you have to buy a third-party insurance, but you don't have to buy a payment transaction insurance necessarily. So what happens, you're going to find, is that actually trade fails. You're going to get, the inability for the shops to work and so on, and you just end up with the big places becoming bigger. Because they effectively have all the flow through and they can actually judge for themselves whether they want your trade or not.
But those countries that are getting hammered right now, right? So there's a lot of parts of the global supply chain that exist in those parts of the world. So they're eventually going to have to leave. So that's going to be a cost to the company as the risks intensify. And so their insurance would be gone as well, which is going to impact the economy of those local places because they're going to lose those jobs. So that's going to cause more destitution in those countries and the regions. But it's going to increase the cost to the companies who've invested in them, which means that's going to impact the economy too. Am I getting that sequence right?
Yeah, you're getting it right. Not necessarily sequence, because it's also things happening simultaneously. But what you are seeing very, very clearly is that a lot of companies are resourcing their supplies closer to home. Now, you have huge pressure from the Trump administration to do that if you're an American company, but also it's a lot of self-preservation that forces you into that thinking that was really triggered by COVID. If you are an assembly plant in Europe, and obviously the car industry is the poster child for this, where 1 in 5 Germans directly or indirectly is employed by the car industry. You are assembling components from all over the world in one big factory that's running 24/7, 365 days a year. And then you stamp made in Germany on it. But you need those components to arrive, because otherwise the whole factory stops. That capital that you're tying in is going to increase because you need larger supplies closer to home, larger stock of supplies. You cannot be exposed to a big ship getting stranded in the Suez Canal and not having the stuff arriving. So costs are going to increase, and we have seen, cost of living going up everywhere in the world. CPI indices are rising,
and it's kind of nothing against globalization, sort of the localization as such in that way, but the reality is a lot of the things is impossible to localize without creating huge amounts of even worse problems. I was talking to a friend yesterday about the rare earth critical materials that every region, and to a large extent every major country, is talking about how they need to ensure their own kind of local supply in that way. These stuff, rare earths are not rare, they're all over the place. They're just very, very low concentration, which means what you need to do is to really kind of concentrate it all back. So for every ton of these things you produce, you create something like 2,000 tons of waste as a result in bringing together. And as you do that, there is a lot of stuff in that 2,000 tons that you don't actually want to be concentrating together also. That's why waste becomes very toxic. And so you're now going to do that everywhere. Incidentally, that's why the US gave up the primacy in their production back in, I've forgotten how long, maybe in the 80s or whatever it was, or 90s. And they actually encouraged China to take it over because it was poisoning their land. So they thought, let China poison China's land instead.
And the devastation up near the Mongolia, that up near the border is just I mean, there's basically, it's not a place for human beings to even live anymore, that land.
No, and one of the things it creates thorium, or it concentrates thorium to kind of dangerous levels dangerous levels, and thorium has a half-life of 14 billion years, which is the life of the universe, 14.5 billion years. So, that means that the bucket of waste at the back of the shed where you created all this stuff is going to stay around longer than how long the universe has been around. And you want that now in every country.
And the cost of, preparing your land so that it doesn't absorb all that poison is so astronomical that it's not even worth doing, right? So,
well, it's not going to happen. It's like what you said at the beginning, or Steve said, is, cutting corners. That's exactly what we're going to do. So all this stuff is going to move around.
Some of the stories I hear behind the scenes of what's going on as far as the storage of this waste that is so poisonous, and the shortcuts that are made, because when a company extracts something from the earth, it signs a deal with the government with a time frame, and beyond that time frame, there's no obligation. So they protect for the time frame, but beyond that time, this and nobody's responsible for the cleanup other than the taxpayers, and you can't clean it up because it's so toxic. So it's just
that's why I think I'm going to show this just in case people see it.
Mine hasn't arrived yet.
Is that in effect what I've come to realize afterwards in talking to people and stuff is, the mechanism proposes is essentially making a covenant with the earth rather than making it with the government. And that's the essential part. And the people it calls onto that is to say to the young people in the world, you guys need to really get together and make that covenant with the earth. And that's your task. And it gives you some financial mechanisms and tricks of the trade, as it were, as to how you can do that in today's economy so that you can be in charge to do it. But the spirit of it fundamentally is very much that you can't actually rely on governments to do this.
No.
This is the radical acceptance thing. Because you vote for the government in order to look after your own people, which is what happens. But when you talk about something that's actually, in that sense, about our planet and our space and our union with the planet, it's the planet that you need to make your covenant with.
So Richard was talking about like the in Germany. So the in Germany. So the deindustrialization of Germany is seen as one of the big reasons why the EU is struggling so much economically, right? And so some of the car makers, some of the really big industry, the chemical industry, have actually fully moved to China now because they just, so that impacts entire towns, and it's lots and lots and lots of different reasons. It's the cost of energy, and obviously the Ukraine invasion doesn't help. Demographics, there's a demographic spiral that's going on, which we can talk about.
Germany has unbelievable issue with demographics that actually are not being debated very much. And they're basically on par with Italy, which are the two poster children for European decline. These countries are basically going to die out unless there is a radical change. And radical change takes a long time to materialize because we're talking cycles of 30, 40 years. And this should have been addressed much, much earlier. Industrial Germany, obviously. Sorry.
But the aging population in the mix, right? So there's less workers, there's less work. Who have to pay higher tax to fund the pensions. So
absolutely. And, at the end of the day, Germany is a very high cost production area. And they have fought that cost basis by consistently moving up the quality and prestige ladder so they could charge the premium for their products. But eventually that comes to an end because others are pushing you from behind, right? So
I think it's interesting you say you describe that, because that is
focusing.
that is the thing about kind of China, is it has massively gone up along. I remember as a child, so sort of the made in China was the thing that everybody joked about. Your little plastic toy or whatever it was, and it was not kind of a high quality plastic. So if you think about the progress that China has made, when Richard and I were working before at the hedge fund that we were working in, we were looking at this sort of Japan, where it was, and compared to kind of other regions in the world. And what we were finding was that China, the number of environmental patents in China, from China, far dominated the total number from all the rest of the world. So even in those areas, which we thought, it would be dominated by the Europeans or something like that, it wasn't actually the case. And this moving up of quality has been absolutely phenomenal. And the technology and the knowledge spread means that it's actually quite easy for other countries to go and pick up from here in that way too. So to the demise of the older kind of old world, it's a long cycle. It's definitely tipping over in some sense. And again, it's this radical acceptance thing, right? The reality is they have a population base that actually isn't going to be able to serve them.
No.
The demographics shape.
I just, there's a piece just came out, I think it was in Time, where basically China's escalating on the quality, but it's also keeping hold of the lower quality, which means that other developing nations aren't getting those opportunities. But I want to step back and Richard, I want to bring you up. So the economy's been bubbling around. The bad news around the economy's been bubbling around for a while, right? So as we've seen in recent years, that bubbling happens for a while and then it's bang, it's all over. We've got crypto in the mix. That's been on a rise, but the AI bubble's always sort of mentioned in it. What's happening? What stage are we at? And just give us your predictions about what you see coming.
Predictions are difficult and they come with a lot of caveats. So I think we are in a bubble of sorts. That's driven by AI and other things. Mostly, it's actually not driven. Let me go back. The question is whether it's a push or a pull. The pull would be that AI is so attractive, you have to be in the game to see tomorrow, and therefore I'm attracting the capital. The push theory is that there's so much money sloshing around that has to go somewhere that it's driving everything up. And I think media is phrasing it very much as a pull story, that AI is attracting all these enormous amounts of capital because it's the place to be, it's the future and everything else. But I'm leaning more and more towards a push story, that we have excess capital in the world from a variety of reasons that needs to find a home. And because the relative real return, risk-free real return, is so low, it's prepared to go into more and more adventurous pockets. And therefore that capital is a wave that's driving everything higher. And the most obvious beneficiary of this is kind of AI-styled investments. The valuations do not make sense to me. I cannot envisage a future where we can justify them. That does not mean there won't be winners. And I think you've clearly in the last couple of weeks seen that the one clear winner is materializing, and it's Google, or Alphabet as it's called now. And I quite like that. Not because I hold Google shares, but it's the only company I own of the Magnificent Seven. And the reason is I think they have a really, really good business model to back it. And they can afford to spend some of this money to see whether it works out or not. I cannot see OpenAI ever making money because they're burning cash at a rate that's just tremendous. I'm genuinely unsure whether NVIDIA will ever make any serious money, because the extrapolation of the growth that is required for a shareholder here to make money doesn't make sense to me. So I think anyone can do their own research, their own analysis, and see what works out. But I think there will be winners in the space, and I think there will be probably a few more losers in the space. And for me, being very much, historical top-down guy, I draw parallels to historical game-changing events we've had in the history. 30 years ago, it was the internet coming on stream. 150 years ago, we electrified the world. We had the railroads 200 years ago. We had the combustion engine becoming mass marketed, etc. These were game-changing innovations that drove unbelievable economic activity and rapid ascent of wealth in the world, because they truly were phenomenal innovations. Will AI surpass that? I'm not sure.
I want to just kind of clarify a bit of what I think Richard means by whether NVIDIA will make money. So NVIDIA at the moment has a dividend yield that's about 0.02%, basically, which means that if you spend $100 on it, you're going to get 2 cents back every year in that way. So to what he means is not that the price of NVIDIA won't go up, but actually it's going to create a profit to pay you in terms of the stream of income that you need for you to actually get it back. So you think of 0.02%, that's what, 5,000 years, or 50,000 years or whatever, 5,000 years to get it back, I think. So that's kind of what he means by whether NVIDIA will make money. There's, of course, the part that we actually do, or people who buy it, or the pensions that buy it, is essentially that you have a marking to market of the value of the company between today and tomorrow. And that can well keep going up. And that can go up for as long as people keep putting money into the pensions, so the pension will buy them, will support it that way.
All right. So one of the things that came out with this recent Google announcement that you're just referencing, Richard, is also that it won't be reliant on NVIDIA chips.
Correct.
So that was a big part of the story, and it was going to use less energy, and it's a different thing. I don't know, Joe, have you got any thoughts that you want to share?
Well, I was looking at what is in the way of the business right now, some of the interesting things, right? So the one thing I picked up just before we came on was that Microsoft doesn't have enough plugs to put in the chips that they actually have on stock. So they have chips, but they have nowhere to put them. And the other thing that's very interesting is the complication around energy, and it's about the fundamental risk that I think the whole industry is on the edge of, right? You would think the idea of cheap energy would be great, for the idea of AI, right? If energy became cheap, it actually was expressed this way. If energy suddenly became cheap, it would ruin all the business that was built around the energy being as expensive as it is right now. So all the service contracts, all the businesses, and all the infrastructure that's being invested right now, that stuff, it would actually be bad, ironically, for growth. So they're kind of in a very strange place now where energy should come down, not radically quickly. It needs to come down it's almost like AI needs to have its own sustainable curve. It needs to have the price of energy come down in such a way that it doesn't destroy the infrastructure that it actually relies on. And the other bit is just that, yeah, the rest of the capacity can't keep up with what they need from it as well. Like, if you've got all these chips that can't go into plugs because you don't have plugs to plug them into. It also begs the question then. It says, like, if your projections on Nvidia, for instance, are about continued growth of demand, if the other holdups in the other business, in a sense, AI is encountering its own supply chain challenge. The supply chain of energy, the supply chain of computing hardware on which to run the computing chips that you've just got from Nvidia and anybody else.
I think
All right.
One way to kind of think about what Joe was saying is that every from the economic perspective, people understand the idea that there's a supply and a demand, and so they meet somewhere, and that's kind of that determines your prices. What happens then is that people try to actually go along and make their business a little bit more stable. So they know the supply and the demand may change. So they kind of establish ways to kind of say, we agree on a price over the next 2 years, over the next 10 years in that way. And that therefore says if the supply and demand change, in some sense it's good, but the person you've agreed to in that way is going to lose out. Someone is going to lose out in that. And if you think about what Richard was saying, how all the materials come around from all the different places, and that includes energy that comes from all the places. Every bit of it has something like that going on. So it's a massively interconnected system where we have tried to ensure none of it changes, which is again why it's so hard to change the economy in that way, because we actually make ourselves, all of these things is spending most of their efforts in trying to ensure it doesn't change in that way. So you're really fighting against it. And the result is that when you go along and from another perspective, you want to say, oh, here's a problem, I can fix it by doing that. And if you become too aggressive in doing it, you cause everything else to collapse along. And that's kind of the situation with economy, is also the situation of what we're doing with the environment and all the other stuff that we talk about. The natural world itself has those kind of connections along in there. And so the aspect about, progressing along in a way that everything has the time to adjust and is able to is really quite important. But the more panicked we are about the crisis, the more we actually end up trying to progress in the way to solve the very particular thing we think is the issue. So
okay, so can I ask a couple of questions? So I'm not sure who wants to answer this. So David, what you're just sharing tells me that there's an extreme vulnerability in that mix, because if one piece fails, then boom for the rest, right? But the other thing that I was going to ask, based on what Richard was saying earlier, is I know there's no historical parallel to what AI can do, but what's the best historical parallel to where we are from a market perspective, based on the complexity of that whole industry, the investment, the numbers, all that sort of stuff? Is there even a remote historical parallel that you could bring in, or have we never seen anything like it before?
I think, first of all, let me try both of them, and then Richard can correct me along in that way. So the first part I would say is that the backpack of stones that you've got on, which is what I call climate change, is actually making every one of those things more likely to fail.
Yeah.
So it's not so much as one thing suddenly failing, is that everything suddenly failed. So that's the real kind of catastrophic risk in a sense, but it comes along in not as a crumbling in that way. It's not your building that suddenly tips over and boom. It's more of a crumbling that somehow, as this does, so all the ones around it, everything's kind of crumbling around in that way. The way I think of it is that I do think we're very much like the 1920s in the, kind of the roaring 20s, where it was where we had amazing technology. I mean, the transatlantic cable was laid for telecommunications over that time. And of course, that then tipped into the Great Depression, which went into a world war, which went into all the rationing and everything after the World War, before it eventually sort of came out through. Richard, I'll show you for.
Yeah, I see great historical parallels with many of the episodes we've had. If we're looking strictly at numbers of valuation of the stock market and these companies, you are now more or less where we were at Thanksgiving 1999 in the height of the internet bubble. Those valuations are pretty much equal. However, I would say that we are a little bit better off now than then on a relative basis, because interest rates are lower than they were then. Bond yields are lower. So it's easier from the sort of discount factor to justify the higher valuation now than it was then. Projected cash flows are slightly better now than then. So in that parallel, we look slightly better off now than we did, 25 years ago. But you're still clearly on a long run historical basis, very much in bubble territory. My preferred analogy is probably not the 1920s at the moment. I'm more inclined to see parallels with the 1960s going into the 70s, where inflation started to become an issue because government's spending programs outstripped consistently their tax receipts. US was fighting a war in Vietnam that was extraordinarily costly. And at the same time, they introduced masses of social spending, trying to lift people out of poverty, increase, education, increase social care, etc. That was also obviously very costly. And basically, the US government deficit was out of control as the 60s became the 70s. And I think that situation is very much what we're seeing at the moment, that US and the rest of the Western world effectively have lost control of government spending because they're unable to make any cuts. There are too many loud voices all demanding that more is spent on this, this, and this. And what happened in that situation was that actually the credit markets rebelled and said, you cannot keep on borrowing at this rate. And yields rose massively, which broke the back of the stock market.
All right. So, I want to take another step back and sort of bring what you've just said in, Richard, right? So when we look at what's going on in the European Union right now, they have to spend more money on defense. Their debt's increasing. They've got this massive social safety net. They're making decisions for the future that are hurting the present, which is creating a lot of political tension, the rise of the far right, all that sort of stuff, right? And then we've got the US that pretends nothing, that the climate change, it doesn't matter. It's a con. And so they're making decisions and also increasing their debt. Then you've got the rest of the countries in the world suffering from extreme weather impacts that basically destroy entire economies. So we've got the economy as it is, but we've also got the impacts of climate and extreme weather events and droughts and famines and war and, civil war and all that sort of stuff. So let's bring the story together, because if we only look at it, like even asking you to do the historical thing, there's no historical precedent for where we are, because we've never been where we are before. We might have been economically, geopolitically, but we haven't also had environmentally, globally. So let's bring the story together, and whether it's the backpack of rocks or so the heat extreme report, the extreme weather reports in Asia, these risks will displace close to 2 billion people by 2030.
Yeah.
And I'm still seeing 2050, 2100 in the headlines, but the actual risk measurements are by 2030. So we're almost 2026. That's 4 years away, but it's not going to just arrive on the 1st of January 2030. It's already here. So how does that look for everyone? Who Richard, you want to start?
I mean, for me, the situation with climate change is in its initial phase all about money. Climate change is increasing costs on each and every one of us on the planet in different ways, because we all have different living circumstances and different economics. It's increasing cost for companies and for governments all over the world. This will not stop. It will accelerate as climate change gets worse. In practical terms, I suspect Europe are the ones that will be facing the political economic challenge first, because what I see happening is basically a manufactured union of states that virtually broke down when you had 2 million refugees from the Middle East because of war. And with the projections we have for what's going to happen in Africa with drought and heat, and it's not difficult to envisage, 200 million Africans coming across the Mediterranean, because if you cannot survive where you are, you move.
Yeah.
That's in our DNA. And these people are going to move to places where they have a future, or hope they have a future. There is no conceivable way Europe can cope with that kind of movement of people. And I think actually, if you square that circle, it's also where the fundamental difference lies very much between European NATO and non-European NATO with regard to the conflict in Ukraine and in the Middle East. Europe's biggest fear out of all this is actually not necessarily the military outcome, but the cohesion and the movement of people it can bring with it. Yeah. Europe cannot, in its current political form, deal with a huge amount of people fleeing these conflict areas into the Union, even though countries like Italy and Germany should welcome immigration with open arms, because it's the only way those societies will survive. But politically, it cannot.
But then some of those countries, especially the southern European countries, will have to migrate north too, right? So there'll be internal migration and external migration,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And you're seeing it everywhere, right? People go, excuse me, people go to the areas that offer better economic future, more hope of prosperity. And the climate is driving a lot of that at the moment.
Yeah.
I think there's, I think the reality is that you can't really tell. I mean, if you don't get people coming into kind of Europe has a real problem. If you get people coming into Europe, it depends on what you want your policy to be, because what Trump is expressing, for example, is kind of the mentality that's very much prevalent within Europe and so on, which is that when you have people coming in, you have to make it so that they are economically unproductive. You have to force them to be economically unproductive. It's not that they want to be, it's not that they are unable to be, it's actually that you have to create a regime where they're not productive. That's hugely expensive. Just think about, you've got a bunch of people who are actually really has great initiatives and really motivated, and you now have to cage them in a way that they are explicitly unproductive. That costs you a lot.
Explain why you're saying you have to keep them unproductive, David.
Well, that's the policy. I'm just saying that's the policy. The current policy towards foreigners coming into the country in Europe is that they have to be kept unproductive and preferably returned in some way.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
I've never heard
It's
that.
bonkers.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
The
think about
explicit-
what's happening. You have illegal immigrants crossing the channel in small boats. They are fleeing for a myriad of reasons. But the underlying factor is they think they will be better off there than they were at home. They arrive. The first thing that happens is that get welcomed by customs and whatever, and get marshaled into some processing facility where you're trying to establish their identity, who they are, where they came from, their circumstances, and then they're being put up in some form of asylum camp, whether it's a hotel or location. You compare that with 150 years ago, the people that came off the boats that went to the US for exactly the same reason. It was like, if you don't work, you ain't gonna survive here, mate.
Mm.
That is two worlds so diametrically opposed. And at the end of the day, what drove American prosperity and supremacy in the economic area and other areas was this massive influx of people who came and were prepared to buy into the American dream and work.
And
Here we're telling the same people, oh, you can't work because we need to process you for 9 months. And when we have processed you, we will probably send you back. I mean,
and let's be very clear. It's not just that you can't work. You are not allowed to volunteer. You're not allowed to contribute your effort in any way that's a positive. You are excluded from helping an old lady with what may be necessary to help her do something. Under any kind of contract, you're not allowed to grow your food. You're not allowed to grow your a bunch of tomatoes so that you can have something that you like to eat, because that is economically productive. So you are forced, the whole system waste all of its revenues in trying to force people who want to be economically productive from being economically productive.
And then that group of people get blamed for everything that's going on. All right. So before we move on to why there's no money from wealthy nations to poor nations after COP, who's going to give us a summary of what it means to the average citizen? All of these different pieces that are going on. What does it mean? Because I mean, I can obviously add my perspective, but I'd rather hear from the experts.
Well, I think it is. I mean, it's very psychological. Basically, I was having a conversation last night on a Thanksgiving dinner, and they were saying that when people talk of climate change and make science great again type sort of comments and so on, it's not the science that is kind of being ignored. It's the psychology that's being ignored. It's the psychology that's driving people to say, I don't want to look at it this way. Back to that radical acceptance, I'm going to do that now.
Yeah.
That's not, the science isn't understood. It's because the psychology says I'm going to do this.
Yeah. Anyone else? Joe, do you want to say anything? No? All right.
Not
I'm going to move
particularly.
on. I'm going to get, so yeah, I mean, I kind of look at it and it's chaos ahead.
Yeah. I think that's
look it in the
inevitable.
eye, understand it for yourself. Even if you don't believe in climate change, you've got the AI risks. If you're going to lose your job, what does that mean? How much financial burden do you have if the global economy collapses because one piece of the AI infrastructure falls over, or the what is it? The Wizard of Oz mirrors. Someone pulls back the curtain, sort of thing. All of these things are possible, and then you've got climate change on top of it. So, but COP30. So developing countries secured a tripling to the 120 billion of annual finance to help them adapt to the impacts of extreme weather. Right. So that was seen as one of the woohoo, we've achieved this. As we know, we're witnessing firsthand, especially out here in Asia, what's going on from an environment perspective. I don't want to talk about COP. I think everyone's talking about COP, failure, all that sort of stuff. I really just want to talk about this piece, the funding to developing nations. Because when we talk about migration, right, if we can spend the money to keep people where they are, they're not going to come to these countries and become a burden on these countries, even though technically they shouldn't be a burden. They are actually necessary to, fund the next generation of taxpayers to make sure people get their pension. So they're not actually a burden, but I think we've got to stop seeing them that way. But if we can help people stay where they are, and that requires a lot. But spending money on making sure they've got renewable energy so they can reduce their dependence on coal. The refugee camps, they're all the deforestation that follows. Solar powered cooking devices for people in these refugee camps, all those sort of things, right? But David, you don't think there's any money and it's not coming. So
no, I think when you look at the classic scene, kind of like in a Yes Minister, fantastic series. Anybody want to watch it? In the British comedy, about the wrangling that goes on in the cabinet and in the inner circles and so on. A lot of that wrangling is over kind of the budget thing, and the Chancellor sits there and says, "Nope, no money for you, no money for you," and all the rest of it. And what's happening in the COP processes is that you have these negotiators who talk to each other, but they're not actually the ones who are talking to the governments in the chancellors to say, is there actually the money for that tripling as such? So what happens is all of this is done in isolation, away from the actual allocation of budgets. And if you look along what's going on, and there was a poll this week, I've forgotten who it was from, but I thought it was very interesting, was that taxpayers in richer countries, the richer countries are essentially, the OECD countries, and they are basically anyone where the income, the median income is kind of maybe like $20,000 or above kind of thing.
Yeah, 15 I think is the cutoff point. Maybe even a little bit below that for the newcomers, but they would be considered the wealthy countries of the world.
Yeah. So anyone in there, essentially, they basically feel that the tax money that they give should not go to other countries. That's a trend that's increasing. They're increasingly feeling that way. Because they actually feel, as Richard's saying, there's the welfare, their own thing. They see their own flooding and all of those things. They need their defenses. They need to look after those things first. So the COP side is actually to say, you guys need to help other countries first. But the unfortunate thing about it is that all of those agreements actually have no power on the ability on their governments domestically. They're actually agreements made complete isolation of the actual policies within the governments. So what you're going to see is there is no money coming. When you come back down to it, if you were to talk to a German person, it's like, we don't have enough money. You talk to a British person who just saw the budget, the taxes effectively increase. It's now a higher tax on the fact that your house has increased in price, and everybody thinks that's a terrible thing and so on. And they're less likely to want to go and offer any kind of their tax money to someone else.
I was just sharing an article. Forbes came out. The world's 50 richest countries came out. So for 2025, and a lot spread around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think David is describing exactly the process that's going on. We are very much arrived at the point where each and every elected and non-elected government is just looking out for their own. And that's the breakdown in kind of globalization and global cohesion you will see. It's what's happened historically. And then an event takes place that forces countries to come together again and face this overarching threat. And my opinion, what will happen will ultimately be climate change that will force a rethink. But we're not there yet. And in the meantime, it will force individuals to make choices that they can take responsibility for and live with.
Well, I want to add, climate change is there already. The psychology of actually rethinking is not there yet.
No, they're into total or almost total disconnect.
So my concern, and we're going to talk about it in another context later, is by the time we wake up, it will already be too late to be able to do anything, because once we move into that sort of stages of chaos that climate change is going to bring and have impacts in multiple ways, I think being able to pull ourselves back from that. So my concern is the lack of vision in leadership, who in preparing us for the future we've got coming versus trying to maintain the status quo, because that's easier politically. And, like the whole Iran situation, like I said, we're going to talk about it in another way in a bit. It's jobs or ecological destruction. I'm going to choose jobs because it's going to keep people happy for now, but this is going to catch up. And but the whole world's in this sort of, we'll do this jobs bit, ecological destruction, we'll just ignore it, but it's going to catch up. And the leaders, I think there's some sort of people coming out of COP, some groups, some countries are coming together doing separate things, but we're at a point now where it's not just when the environment tips us into sort of chaos, it's when it's the decisions that our politicians make today. They're driving us towards collapse, rather than saying how, so Nate Hagens has got, we bend or we break. It's better to bend than it is to break, right? So how do we bend now? Because we can't stop what's coming, but how do we bend rather than break, or which is basically collapse? And that's my concern.
I think there are two elements to sort of answering what you do. But first, I'd like to give myself another plug. What you were saying just reminded me of this section in the book. So I'm just going to read that a little bit out. It's just a very short bit. Oh, there it is. That's the book. Yep. Why then have people, businesses, and governments not done this? To your answer, this is largely because things have not gotten bad enough to abandon existing economic thinking. Changes are difficult. They happen only out of absolute necessity, and that only if it can be accepted that the changes open doors.
Yeah.
So that's the part in there.
Yeah.
So to the side then, what can you do is in that way is that you yourself can recognize that change is necessary easier and faster than, in a sense, that whole system, which relies on everything staying the same. Back to the comment that we were saying, everywhere has its demand supply, and it needs that to stay the same. So it creates an enormous rigidity in the whole thing. But you yourself can actually prepare that better. So if you think that your pension is going to collapse and you want to do something sensible about it, your choice is, how do I spend the money in that way, and spend it now? So what you want to do is to start asking, what can help me in terms of providing me with a source of my own income that's out of my genius of what I can do to connect with other people. And the little that you do in that gives you more confidence about how you can look at the future. So you're not looking and say, I earn, whatever it is currently, $10,000 a year if you're in that, or 15,000 if you're in that crossroad, in that threshold of rich country, or 150,000 if you are kind of amongst the top 1% in that threshold, or whatever it is, and saying, how can I replace all of that? You're basically just after, how do I make that $100 out of my own genius in what I can do by connecting with people, genuinely connecting, not sort of like flogging them something they don't need, because that will give you a huge confidence in your own ability. That will allow you to see the world differently, and it will make you begin to feel, actually, you know what, I can have some sort of agency, even no matter what happens. And the whole system, as people begin to do this, is going to loosen up. And that's what you want to be able to reflect. You need it to loosen up. The politicians are trying to make it tighter and tighter and tighter.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of what you just said, David. Right, so for years now, I've made a real commitment to buy very few clothes. And anything I do buy, it's high quality, or I get it made. I'm in Asia, right? But everything gets repaired to the point that it's basically, by the end, it's a house dress that's almost falling apart as I'm wearing it, and then it becomes a rag, and then it becomes this, and it becomes that, right? But the last thing I try and do is put it in the rubbish bin. But the number one ally I need to achieve that is someone who can use a sewing machine. I used to sew, but I have no interest in it anymore. But the first thing I did when I came to Singapore was to find a lady with a sewing machine, and it's everything. If it gets a hole, it gets patched, just to try and make things. So someone who wants to make $100 a week extra, right? Get yourself a sewing machine, just repair basic stuff. That to me is one of those little jobs. Because as people start to become conscious of their clothing and what they buy and making it last and not throwing it in, so it's ending up in landfill on the other side of the world, I think those sort of roles, which will be predominantly female, but they in Asia they're easy to find. They're not so easy to find in wealthier nations. Like, I'm trying to get some shoes fixed here. You can get basic stuff done. I can't get the more complicated stuff done. So I'm looking for a cobbler in Singapore that can fix something that should be fixable, but people haven't been spending on getting shoes fixed like that for a long time. So the skills have gone, right?
Yeah.
So there's some old skills that we need to bring back, but also I think there's some of the skills you can't outsource it to AI. These are local skills, and I think we need them everywhere. Should be able to walk to get those sort of things done. So as an example, but as we all decide to consciously consume less, that's also going to impact the global economy, because it's our consumption that is the measurement of GDP. So that's going to have an impact, right? So our decision to take less from the earth will change the global economy one way or another, or we'll be forced to do it because
We'll be forced to do it, is my guess. And
I hope we wake
GDP
up
is
before
largely
then.
a measurement problem. To be perfectly honest, I mean, the issues that I have and most people I know with current GDP calculations are frankly, they're embarrassing.
Yeah.
So I think we need to get that notion out of our heads. But you're describing something that is becoming a real problem in our part of the world. Cobblers, huge issue. One of the things not regularly, but when I do buy new shoes, I always spend money on them, not trainers, but proper shoes, because I know they can last me a lifetime. But you need to be able to look after them and find someone who has the skill set to do the necessary adjustments, replacements, and repairs. And that is actually vanishing, because the average age of a cobbler in the UK is probably 60.
Yeah.
And it's not only cobblers.
Yeah, there's a lot of those skills that have disappeared. David?
I want to add a lean onto what you just expressed there, which is that, if you are someone who enjoys kind of doing bits and pieces on the sewing machine, it's very obvious that that's the direction you can lean into in that way. So if you're a person who doesn't like that, you can get your things done that way, then you can use that to lean into what you would like to do. I like talking about climate change, so I would like to lean into that and tell people how to talk about climate change with their children, for example.
Yeah.
And that then becomes something I can do. And that element where you actually connect with what is what I think of as kind of that spiritual mission, in some sense, that you feel that you have, as the way by which you can make that extra little bit along, really helps you in terms of how you can look at all the facts and the reality of what it is. Because you're not looking at it from a perspective where you have an identity for yourself, and you can actually think, okay, fine, I can now look at that much like I can look at water flowing around, or looking from a safe ground, watching the sea as it gets rough and so on, and think, okay, yes, I can see all those things, so I can see where I am. Maybe I'll try and have that moment to consider how I make my steps forward in that way. And this is really important. If people start doing that more, I think governments typically end up reflecting people, so they start looking at kind of the whole world situation a little bit more in that way too. At the moment, problem is every government is desperately, why have we got an increase in military spending when as far as I can see from all the people I talk to around the world, nobody wants a war. So why are we doing that? Just because they're not actually get that sense of actually where is my place? I have a place in the world. Governments don't feel they have a place in the world. You know, the Americans with the Make America Great Again, the name says it all. I think I no longer have a place in the world, which is why I want it to be great again in that way. It just says it all.
Yeah. All right. So I think we got off a bit off track with the money, but the money for developing nations. But the really important point here is, we are connected. David and I, in particular, are connected to a lot of people in a lot of countries around the world who are operating at the front line of climate change in poorer nations, there's a lot of give us money, and I think their politicians definitely need to be at the front of that. We're seeing a lot of Pacific Islanders coming into Australia, migrating into Australia because their lands will be going under. We need to encourage that. We need to encourage our governments to do the right thing, but we have to be realistic that everyone's going to be on their own as this unravels and it gets worse. And obviously, if we see the AI bubble burst, it's going to have a global impact on the economy. And it's not like we're going to sort of pull ourselves together and come back from that in the same way we have in the past. We actually need to come back from that in a very, very, very different way. So I think, what we were saying earlier is look this situation in the eye from an economics perspective for yourself, for your family, for your community. Understand what it really, really means. Understand your personal risks. And it's not just from climate, it's also from job risks and all those other implications. And start making decisions. I'll give you another example. A young lady in another place was talking about her and her disabled child, how it's very difficult for them to live and to find the rent and for all that sort of stuff. And I want to say to people like that, stop thinking about maintaining a life that has been promised you from a social system, and start thinking about creative ways that you could potentially live a life. And that would be coming together as a community, living in a community sort of way of living where everyone sort of comes together, grows a garden together, has shared energy, resources, all that sort of stuff. So I think there's a switch that needs to go on about we keep looking back to what we were promised, and we've got to start looking forward to what is promised.
Yeah, and very importantly, to the point that we are alone, is if you don't want to be, then you need to do the things so that you are not.
Joe, you've been pretty quiet. Do you want to jump in, or?
I was thinking about this from a perspective, obviously, of I think if you are in a position to look at it and go like, this is an ideal world, I can make all these choices. It's easier to prescribe all this, right? And I think there is more like when I was looking at the recent data recently about people who are coming out of school, they just graduated and all that, and this whole prescription about what they can do with the community and all the different things. They at the same time still need to figure out the day-to-day living. They need to get that in place. So the choice, making better choices about clothing, for instance, is ideal. At the same time, though, do you have the money to do that kind of investing in terms of clothing, in terms of getting someone to make it for you? My daughter is someone who does address that. She goes thrifting, so she always walks into a secondhand shop to find stuff, which is great. But she's also having trouble finding a job. Just getting a job in the first place, right? So these choices that we should be making, ideally, once you've set up yourself to make those choices, are all well and fine. But I do think there is this real challenge as people move forward. I mean, I was trying to put together a metaphor. It's an incomplete one, but I'm just thinking we're in a boat where there are a few things that have to happen at the same time. We have to move towards a destination. There's a hole, and there's also the just we have a hole that we can try to patch, but the hole is so big that if we try to hold it or close it, both our hands are occupied, so we can't do anything else.
Yeah.
And on the other side of things, you can go like, well, or I could still row and maybe try and get the water out of it as well. So there's a big problem that needs to be solved, and there is also the other thing that you have to do. And doing the solving the big problem sometimes stops us from actually doing any of the other stuff as well. Like, it's just like, that there is something of a trade-off there. So it's not something that we have the conundrum is making those choices, and I think it also scales out. So we talk about governments. The one thing that I was thinking about is actually that the government isn't the issue; it's who is in government, right? You really have to think about the ability to change things, and it's the problem is the agility with which we could do that. We can't change who is in power straight away. I mean, and I want to make sure it's clear that I'm not speaking insidiously, but I'm just saying, like, if the government is not doing something, it doesn't do the thing it wants to do. Trying to encourage them to do it isn't necessarily going to solve the problem, because it may not be the problem that everyone subscribes to as well. And I mean, even though it's very clear what's happening in the world, I can say that our perspective on things and what we see as the future is actually a minority view, even though it's very clear to everybody else that there is a problem. And I speak from a perspective of having tried to help people quit smoking, right? I think there's a whole thing about smokers. Smokers know all the challenges involved in terms of what smoking's about. They understand that the antisocial aspects of it. They understand the financial cost of it, and they still smoke, right? And we can say it's about addiction, but there's also some aspect of it which is just behavioral. People are kind of going to do the thing that they want to do, and perhaps not in their self-interest as well. And the challenge is to get more people on board, right? You can try to get smokers to change what they're doing, or in the end come to a point when everybody around them says, hey, look, we don't want this smoking thing to happen, right? And if enough of that happens, then it becomes it's the change that needs to happen. So it's a cultural and environmental change in terms of people, and that's always going to be the big challenge. People can know something is wrong. I can know that I'm not getting enough sleep. I can know that I'm not eating the right food, but even in my self-interest, I know I'm not doing that for myself, because certain things, I'm getting some kind of positive short-term result from doing it that way, right? I'm still getting the cute clothes from China. I'm still having that holiday in this part of the world. I'm enjoying my steak, whatever it is. There's all that as well.
So Joe, I think you're almost getting to grasp it when you talked almost when you were talking about your boat metaphor. So the point of the matter is, like, when you really understand it, and you're right, it is still a minority, but when you really understand it, we decide, or nature decides. And it's literally, there's a decision being made.
Well, nature decides. I mean,
nature wins.
Nature decides, right? It's like your comments, I think, you mentioned about cyclone in the Malacca Strait, right? Never happened before. Nature decides. It's not.
It's not a choice. We're pretending it's a choice. It's not a choice.
That's not the choice. The choice is to recognize that, in this boat situation, you recognize this is an impossible situation for you in that way. And it is you're going to go along down with it. So your choices is, do I tear a part of it so that I can cling onto something and then swim my way along and say, actually, you know what, I can swim. in that way. I said again in the conversation recently with a man who was talking about how when he was young, he was out on a pond and he had swum out and he tried to get back, and he was finding that actually he got too tired and he couldn't, and so he sank down and realized he was in like 4 feet of water. And that's the thing. We get lost by the fact that we are actually so desperate in our swimming, we don't realize we're in 4 feet of water.
Yeah. All right. Well, talking about water. I want to move on to Southeast Asia because a very dramatic series of events is happening, and this is we decide or nature decides, right? So let's get a handle on it. So, but before we talk about what's been happening in Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines, and more, there is a cyclone called Cyclone Senya, which I think even in Singapore we're going to experience potentially sort of the offshoots of it over this weekend. But we're also going to be experiencing the offshoots from the rain as it comes down and heads towards Indonesia. It's been very stormy here for the last week and nice and cool, which has been lovely. But Cyclone Senya formed in the Malacca Straits. When I mentioned it to Steve, he goes, well, no, it's a typhoon. I said, no, it's a cyclone. This has never, ever happened before. And so it's an incredible thing, and it's not incredibly powerful. But when you get a cyclone in an area that's not typically exposed to cyclones, obviously the infrastructure is not. So we'll be seeing what that does. And it's going to basically be going across into this part of Malaysia that's just sort of got this amazing amount of water coming down through Thailand. And we've been seeing the impacts of that. So in India at the moment, there's also Cyclone Ditwa. So Senya and Ditwa are sort of all having an impact. So in Sri Lanka already, 40 are dead from the floods from this cyclone. And it's mainly landslides up in the tea plantations. If you've ever been there, it's a magnificent part of the world. And so now it's going to go up the east coast of India. So we're going to hear a lot more about the impacts of that. But the bigger news that's been happening in Thailand and Malaysia, as well as the Philippines and Vietnam, a once in a 300-year flooding event has occurred. And we won't know the numbers of deaths from this, but hundreds have died, millions have been displaced, and they're basically saying that's what's happened is that two major systems have come together, which is unusual for this season of the year, and that's La Nina as well as a negative Indian Ocean dipole, and we've got warmer than average sea temperatures as most people have. And it's supercharging the rainfall across the region. So the more this rain is not over, it's going to keep coming. But then the other thing that's happening is Vietnam. So last week we were talking about it's been hit by 3 flooding events in 3 weeks. It now has a typhoon on its way, which is looking like it potentially could hit the exact same area of Vietnam. So those poor buggers. So the land is so wet now that this is just going to be a massive disaster, and it's an enormous amount of the region that's being impacted by this. Absolutely enormous. Indonesia has been some of the videos I've seen of the structures just collapsing, and they've got more flooding on the way. Landslides are obviously huge in this part of the world. So yeah, it's pretty bad. But have you been sort of seeing this news in Asia? Has it been getting attention?
Not much.
Oh wow! Really?
I think the truth is I only just heard about it, but of course as soon as I began to look for it, it became something that clearly is was big and important. So it's an example of how I don't see things, and that matches the honest thing about this. I will take a moment though to talk about cyclones and hurricanes and typhoons, because in terms of what they are, they're actually the same thing. It's what they are and where they are that make them gives a name, and it just happens to be that on the west of Malaysia, it's a cyclone. On the east of Malaysia, it's a typhoon.
No,
Did
I'm
not
with you.
know that.
And I don't do, and
Oh, it's the same
like
thing.
you
So
said,
yeah,
one other
Yeah.
part. Basically, when water surface temperature is above 26 degrees, you start getting them to form. And it's because it's hot enough that the air above it is warmed up enough to kind of have this sort of, upward stream along that pulls in the air from the sides. Because, if this is going up, you've got gap and the air comes in from the side. As it comes in from the side, you get the spinning that happens because the earth is spinning along as well. So because you've got enough water temperature to keep that air as it comes in, to keep pushing it up along. So you end up with this sort of sudden transition, as it were. So what that says is you're going to get these as the surface gets warmer and warmer and warmer. In that way. So you are going to see it in unusual places, in unexpected places. And I think that's kind of the reality of the changes that are going on. I think that we and the point, and interesting about east of Malaysia, west of Malaysia, because kind of Straits of Malacca is kind of like separating that along, right? So which way is it? Does it go from one to the other as it crosses over? I think that's.
I don't know if it's an East Coast, West Coast thing, because you get cyclones in India, you get cyclones in Australia, but you get typhoons in much of Asia, right? So yeah.
No, it's just the geographical thing. So it's Northwest Pacific Ocean or South Pacific or Indian Ocean. So it's all of those. It's just a geographic thing.
Yeah.
It just happens to be that the Straits of Malacca straddles, as David said, that there's a little bit here and a little bit there, and depending on where the storm was, that's what it was.
Yeah. And of course, we had I think after our it was last weekend, there was a cyclone. It was pretty big, hit Darwin and that sort of northern area of Australia. So, we've had some pretty big activity, but of course, food security is a big part of this story too. So often when we hear these reports, the first thing we hear about is people. And I think the numbers of people who've died will drastically increase. Some of the stories, there's like a family of 5 inside of a house just floating around, and they only knew that because there was a leg poking out of a door. So those sort of stories are going to obviously increase, but it also impacts food security. So Monica Piccinini is going to be joining us next week. She's an environmental journalist, an award-winning one, and she wrote "The Hidden Cost of Brazil's Climate Crisis for UK Supermarkets," and it talks about how the UK is very, very, very dependent on Brazil for its food imports, and this includes soybeans, beef, chicken, coffee, sugar, and fruit. And because of the climate shifts happening in Brazil, it's obviously going to have an impact over there. What we're seeing right now in Asia is obviously the tea plantations in Sri Lanka have been hit. So the coffee plantations in Vietnam have been hit. But it's a massive rice growing region, and a huge population of people on the earth rely on rice as a primary staple, as a primary source of their calories. So that's another one. The UK's going into another year of extreme drought, so they're expecting that to have a significant impact. And then there's another really interesting story, David, you shared it. People say CO2 is plant food. So when there's more CO2 in the air, yes, our food grows faster, but what is interesting is by growing faster, it's actually losing its nutrients. So there's a term called invisible hunger. Have you heard it? So basically, things like zinc, which has dropped the most, iron and protein, magnesium, calcium, and as well as lots of other nutrients that we get from, say, a potato. The more we have CO2 in the atmosphere, the less nutritious a potato is. Does anyone want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, it's just like you end up eating highly processed food.
Yeah, basically, even though if you think you're eating healthy food. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's I guess it's like you think about chickens and turkeys and stuff like that, right? If you just go for the mass, it is about developing the mass, and based on what, right? So if you're going to fill it with nutrients, great, but usually It's not the nutrients that make up the mass of it. So that's the same thing for vegetation as well. And when something grows quickly, what it is actually is it's a way that nature stores abundance of energy, and so it tracks. I've been spending some time with someone who's been talking about food as medicine, and he's just pointing out that we eat a lot of food right now, where, and not necessarily exactly what we were talking about before, but where the other combination of things that are in there actually prevent the nutrients from being even available. So you can have even if there's zinc, even if there's some vitamins in there, there's just some other elements inside the vegetables that make it such that it's not bioavailable to us. So we have a double kind of a whammy there. But yeah,
Wow.
sorry, it's
You
a
learn
good news
stuff
show today, isn't it?
every day. Every day is a new day for learning. Was
All
a
right,
new
so
page in the book for me.
I want to move on to extreme heat, if that's all right. So, the growing health and financial impacts of heat extremes. So, the World Bank has released a report that's basically saying nearly 90% of South Asia's population will be at risk of extreme heat, and almost 1/4 at risk of extreme flooding by 2030. So, this, we know that. We know that it's going to happen, but that's 1.8 billion people, or 89% of the population, are expected to be exposed to extreme heat, and 460 million people, 62 million people will face extreme flooding. So one of the things that really frustrates me about the whole extreme heat thing is we don't have numbers, so we don't really know what's going on. So I went and talked to my friend AI, and I said, okay, tell me what you know. So basically, the World Health Organization estimates that 175,000 people die in Europe each year from extreme heat. This is different to the numbers that are actually reported, which are 62,000 in 2022, 48,000 in 2023, and 62,000 in 2024. However, if you search for Africa, between 1 and 200 people died from extreme heat. So I did some numbers, and I put some variables in there, and I also I was looking at asking the question about Asia, and basically what they're saying is they based on the types of homes people live in, all that sort of stuff. So we've got 178,000 people dying a year from extreme heat events in Europe now. The vast majority of them are the elderly. In Asia Pacific, they're saying about 2,000 because smaller population. The Americas, 55,000, and I think that's a massive underestimation. In Asia, it basically is about 224,000, and you'll hear 70 people died. You'll hear 60 people died. It's because they don't have the numbers. But when you look at all the variables in Africa, they think that up to 400,000 people could be dying of extreme heat. So looking at the numbers, we're getting close to 1 million people a year dying from extreme heat, and that's only going to get worse. And we have no idea. The media is not reporting it. The numbers aren't getting out there because we don't have access to the data. So extreme heat. And of course, not just the human impact, crops, drought, famine, all that sort of stuff. So often the heat deaths are attributed to infectious diseases like malaria, cholera, and diarrhea, malnutrition, which of course is caused by extreme heat, as well as conflict because there's no water, there's no food, all that sort of stuff. So by 2030.
Yeah.
I think the thing to bear in mind, and this is a radical acceptance thing, so people are not going to like this, but this is what it is that you can't actually tell if you're going to be one of those people or not, because the physiology of what happens as to whether you're susceptible depends on all kinds of things that you may not be thinking of in that way. So the reason why it has those things occurring along, you might just be out there playing some sport or whatever it is, and it's fine previously, but you happen to have drunk a lot the night before and other things, and you get a little bit more dehydrated, it trips you over, and there are all kinds of situations around in that way. I think going back to what we need to do in that sense, what do you do with your money in that way, is to start thinking about being less prescriptive about what you think is going to fix it. What I would say is be more emergent about what you actually, what's actually you, and allow you to lean into that a little bit. Because if you think you need to be in the situation of the boat with a big hole and both hands need to be in there before you can do that, and kind of that's the analogy, you get into you're not really giving yourself the room to be that flexible, break or bend kind of thing. So from where you are now, the fact that you hear about the extreme heat is to say, okay, I understand that there is extreme heat, and that might be me. So what does that mean about what I want to do and how I want to do? So how do I lean into that part of what I can do with that information? So, one thing that we're doing in that way is we're having this show. We think we want to talk to people about it, and that gives us some credibility as we do so. And maybe we can actually use that to do something more as the next step, and actually help someone along that they might pay us for in that way. I don't know where the answer necessarily goes. That's the essence about it being a little bit more emergent about how you get through it.
I think one of the things, David, I hear what you're saying, but I expect to die from extreme heat.
That's because you're in Singapore and I'm in London. So
no, and if I leave Singapore, I'll probably end up in Australia, where I still expect to die from extreme heat. So that's my death that I'm predicting, right?
Well, I think you would be surprised, because I think that you yourself, I would say, is much less likely to die from extreme heat because of what I'm saying, because you're aware of it.
No, because I think it's you're talking about now. I'm talking about as we move forward. So Cambodia is expected to have 250 days a year above 35 degrees Celsius, 138 days above 41 degrees Celsius. So people are saying, "Oh, I'm used to the heat." We're moving into new heat territory. And it's not just about what our bodies can cope with. It's about what the physical infrastructure of the world can cope with. And I did a lot of study of, when does our electricity grid fall over from extreme heat, right? Around about 48 to 50 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, not that far away.
No,
exactly.
no.
When do solar panels start to fail? Around about 60 degrees Celsius.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're heading up. So in some cities in the region, they're expected to get 2 to 7 degrees more heat, the higher temperatures on, so this is of warming, not temperatures. So we're increasing, and I lived in Phuket and I saw the migrant worker camps in tin sheds, and they were surviving. People were dying, not in huge numbers yet, but as the temperature inches up. So it's outdoor workers, obviously the most vulnerable. The elderly are the most vulnerable. But eventually our grids won't be able to support it, which means they're not going to be able to support your crypto or your social media access, because so that's the path, and they're talking 2030.
I believe that. I don't dispute about those sort of paths. What I'm saying is that the action you take, you can either go along and sort of it's not even that choice. You have no choice in that. The action you take is to take that information and then go and actually think, okay, fine, now what do I need to do so that there are people around me who can help me with whatever it is. At this point I don't understand what I might be able to do. I don't understand any of that. But how do I connect up so that people can actually practically help me along? Joseph Mozambique, a few weeks back when we had him, we talked about planting fruit trees. And so, does that help? Well, maybe it does. It shows some of the things around. I had a conversation early in the week with someone who's talking about putting up green roofs at where he is. And, part of that motivation is actually it's a much better way of dealing with the heat that comes on you. Make yourself into a cave. That's a cool cave. Richard knows all about cool wine cellars and how to construct them. So he
Yeah,
can now
absolutely.
look at that.
Yeah.
And a lot of these things don't actually need, cold air sinks, hot air rises.
Yeah.
So, you don't put your cold cave above, you put it below. And so there are actual physical things that can be sorted in that way and can be done. You can have heat chimneys, you can have kind of humidity modifiers. And a lot of these things are not about creating the big technology to provide it. It is about appreciating how nature naturally provides those differentials that makes it possible. The Persians back in the day have these massive structures for creating ice. Again, out of the elements of physics that a child learns in the primary school, but today when we learn in the primary school, we learn it to pass an exam. We don't learn it to know how we can actually make use of these things.
Yeah, but I want to say, David, that when the Persians invented ice, it was in the 10,000 years of consistent temperatures, right? So would those designs work in the temperatures that we're moving into? And I totally, I totally agree with you that
I think
this isn't a message to just give up. It's a message to everybody do something.
Yeah,
everybody to start doing something.
The point is, those designs would not work, but the principles of those designs will still be there.
Yeah.
And that's the part that we lose. We think, and that's the part about the physics education. We don't learn what the principles imply and what they mean. We learn this is the formula to apply, which is actually not physics at all. And so that's where we get into all this trouble. That's where we get into all this thinking that says, oh, I can't do anything.
Yeah. No,
there's
I agree.
No wisdom. There's only knowledge. We've lost any sort of wisdom. We've drowned ourselves in knowledge.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to come back to Andrea about you're being so sure about you'll be taken by heat extremes. I think what it is it's all part of the mix, right? We will be at risk. There will be increased dangers from different things. Our technology becomes obsolete, but we do things to compensate for it, right? I mean, David, you're in the house right now, and it's cold, so the compensation is you wear an extra cardigan. There are some things that we can do to mitigate, and I believe for myself, I will be at risk of extreme to things caused by extreme heat, but I'm far likelier to go by my lack of exercise. I mean, that's I think that's the kind of view that we can also have a look at things. Is like, yes, it's going to be an uncomfortable thing. I think for people to say right now, like you should not bring kids into the world. I don't quite share that view. I do think there is something about coming into consciousness and having an opportunity to play this game once, right? And I don't think it's something you would necessarily have to lose. I think it can be uncomfortable. It can be challenging, but it can also be rather rewarding. It's to look at Mad Max, I guess, as a show and say, is that a tragedy, or is it also at the same time a story of rising up above the challenges that come along with that? Yeah, I mean, look, if you had to choose, if you had to choose a holiday, you wouldn't choose the scene on Mad Max, right? But if you were, for instance, living in a world where Mad Max is the reality, then you try to find the best outcome from that.
Yeah,
that's really interesting point about that sort of playing along, because so a couple of things going back. One will go back to money, but leading first into it is, Richard and I have this game, the game of Thrive. It's a great game. I'm trying to actually find places to play it more in that sense with people. But the game doesn't have an end. It doesn't naturally have an end, and it's designed in that way because the point of thriving is that you can keep playing. So that's the whole point to that. And so going back to the point of money and all the rest, when we talk about the fragility of money and our system and so on, and when we talk a little bit about what you can use it for, and to kind of put what I was saying about how you use it to build kind of your income and stuff, is really the point of money that you may have currently is to allow you to be able to do the things so that you can keep doing things along. And if you actually think that, the financial system is a scheme that's due to tip over, and the government debt is over too much to carry, and the welfare expectations of those things, so you want to start asking yourself, how can I use my money in a way that can keep me continuing on, using money or whatever it is in that way.
So just want to finish the extreme heat thing and then move us into another topic. But extreme heat is expected to become a chronic, near year-round hazard across South and Southwest Asia, parts of Southeast Asia, and Australia. So obviously, the other impacts of something like this are not just it's migration, food impacts. So there's a lot. And look, I'm as optimistic about the future as anyone. Like, I know I'll be fighting until that extreme heat takes me out, right? But the reality is, this is the path that we're on, and we're not doing what we need to do to get off that path, even a little bit of what we need to be doing. So everybody needs to start doing something. But what I want to talk to you about next is why poorer nations, I'm going to show you an image, keep investing in things that are bad for them and for their people. And this is a picture that Steve sent from Delhi this week, and I shared it with the community, and people are saying, "Oh, look! First of all, look at the air. It's actually pretty good for Delhi at this time of year." And the volcano actually picked up a lot of the pollution, and I took it out. So this is good. But what you can see here is a wetlands. That is land reclamation to build industrial facilities, right? I used to drive past places like this. There was one in particular. I used to love watching the water buffalo in this area. I'm driving the boys to school in Phuket. And water buffaloes just are the most ridiculous animals on earth. They really just walk around in the mud all day, and obviously that's an important role to play in mixing the mud up, right? And this group of people came and they took a corner of this area, did what you can see here with that sort of strip of dirt, and then they started to build condos on top of it. And under the fence, you could see the water that was still coming out of it, because it takes time for it to settle. In Singapore, when they reclaim land, they leave it for a long time before they build on it. In this part of the world, they do it instantly, right? So this is not a long-term investment, but they're destroying a wetland. You can see it everywhere you can look. They're basically destroying a wetland. And when it comes to managing floods, that's not a good idea, right? But why do they do it? And there's another story. It's talking about data centers in Mumbai. And one of the people that's being interviewed talking about his mother, who's got 3 brain tumors, because they're next to one of the big coal facilities, which they were going to turn off, and now they're back on because they need the energy for these data centers. So this area of Mumbai, all these people are suffering from the health, and it's a horrible thing. And it's basically for Amazon. Then there's a story in the BBC this week, Delhi pollution, children are hit hardest by toxic air in Indian capital. And it's a terrible, situation. The life expectancy for people in New Delhi is 10 years less than the rest of the country. These cases have increased tenfold in recent years for the kids. They normally see an average of 20 to 30% patients with such complaints during the pollution season, which is kind of almost over now. It goes up to 50 to 70%. And then another big story that was breaking on social media this week was in Kenya. So basically the Masai Mai sort of migration route, companies like there's a new Ritz-Carlton, which is owned by Marriott Group. They built these luxury safari lodges. And then there's these pictures of all these animals that are dead on the side of this migration route, because the physical structures are destroying the migration path, and it's having a devastating impact on the animals. So it's a stupid thing, right? So people are coming to see these animals they're paying a lot of money to stay in these hotels, and those hotels could potentially ultimately destroy what those people are here for. And people outside of the region often struggle, or outside of the global south, especially in the wealthy sort of global north type countries. They feel this real anger towards people in this region for making these decisions. But especially since the pandemic, this is getting worse, this situation, because people are desperate and countries are desperate and they're getting poorer, and those sort of decisions will continue to be made. You know, I mean, it's a big reason why we left Phuket, because I was so depressed watching forests getting chopped down so villas could be built, and it was having a really big impact on my mental health, being a witness to this destruction. So,
I want to add one thing, a message I got over the week on that issue from some people who are living in those areas, who were saying, their lives is in danger physically. So they've gone silent. So the reality is, these things are being built over the lives, not just of the animals, but of actual people.
Yeah.
And they're not lives as in you've moved them away and you've lost a livelihood. It's that, they are killed for you to build.
Yeah. That's definitely another story that's going on here for sure. But to me, the environmental impact is the biggest story.
Well, that's the point, right? Because the environmental impact is the impact of that relationship people have with the natural world around them, and so
the indigenous communities, right?
I think indigenous makes them look like people who haven't developed. So I don't actually want to use that phrase in that way. It tends to carry, whenever you see an image of an indigenous person on the news, there's so much they are people. Call them indigenous or whatever. It's like, the guy who lives 2 streets down from me is not indigenous to that street. We don't call him indigenous to that street.
Okay, you've got a different take on it, but because it's the local people, so the Maasai in that area.
Yeah, the local people is a better word.
So the First Nations people, or indigenous is still a commonly used word. It's not an insulting word, but it's the original people, the people that are tied to the land and the animals, who understand the rhythms. Because the other people in Kenya are also indigenous to Kenya, right? But not in the same way.
You have people who kind of take on that lifestyle and those things too, and but that's a separate part. But the point I wanted to bring about is that it is money behind all these things. Ultimately, it is about the money, and the money is also why you want to go there, because you worked so hard to get your money that you want to have a nice, enjoyable holiday, and and that's what provides the money to allow all of this to go on through. And back to the point, who's going to win, climate or nature or whatever it is? When you go there, then you're going to die of the heat. So that's where your money will go. That's another way of thinking about it too. So it's important to remember that the money buys you unintended consequences, and one of those might be, the gentleman in Greece, the British doctor, who died because of the heat on a lovely holiday that he spent his money on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, famous deaths are always a good wake-up call, right? But this case in Africa, I think it's because what's been going on there, as far as how the Maasai warriors have been treated for a number of years now, has been not just in Kenya, in the region. This is the point where the people who know the animals all over the world, we need to be embracing their knowledge. Indigenous knowledge is a huge part of the answer to the problems that we face, but it's also the time when they're actually suffering the most. So, like David said, they're under threat. If you want to get behind this, a great place to start is to go after the Marriott group, protest them. The thing is, the hotel chains, I learned this in Phuket, the hotel chains don't own the properties. They rent them and they put their brands on them, right? There's a local owner. So there's money being made locally here. But if you can go through Marriott, that's a path. But then they could just leave and then sell it to another brand that's not a global brand. So it doesn't really solve the problem. But it is that this is an opportunity where you can step in and become part of it. Because they actually think it's enough to actually destroy this migration, which is what a lot of people go to the region for. So,
the way you can actually do something about this is to have the attitude that the local people or indigenous people there have stories and lessons that we actually want to pay for and learn from. That way, because there is an economics to this, that they are in a position where they cannot kind of fight back in that sense because the economics is tilted against them, because their traditional lifestyle is not a money-based kind of economy. So you have that sort of traditional lifestyle, which is not a money-based economy, facing an economy of money. And there needs to be some element of that money that flows in their direction in that way. So this is the part where actually, if you think that their knowledge is somehow something that is useful for you in where you are, form that connection, allow that difference in the economy to develop and to emerge. And that's the place where you can actually do something about it. Because without that, you're always on the sideline trying to protesting against this very rigid system that we keep with our money. And you're going to lose. It's priced in. The groups that the government is behind this, right? The government licenses it in that way too, and the government needs money. And the government needs the money because they say the Maasai needs the welfare, and the Maasai needs the welfare, and you can see how that circle is going to go along.
Because they keep kicking them off their land, so they can't do their traditional work, so they can't sustain their lives, right? I've got to go in 4 minutes. I'll come back on. I've got to go in 4 minutes, so I can leave you guys to wrap up. But Jax is performing the lead guitar for Thunderstruck at the center of a circus performance at school, and I have to be there on time to see it because I think it's going to be great.
Yes.
Of course, we'll share the video, but yeah. I mean, but I just want people to really think about it. So a lot of people outside of this region, they jump on stuff like this, but aren't necessarily understanding the sort of the way it works. There's another story. Pakistan loses 6% of its GDP to corruption. And that's all over the region, all over the global south. Corruption is in the lifeblood of many of the countries. I think the young people, we've seen the protests coming up all over Asia and across the region. Corruption, but I think that the young are going to be the ones that make the difference here, right?
Yes.
But it's not easy, and there's like COVID had a massive impact on the regions, and money disappeared. All those sort of little, you've got sovereign wealth funds in many nations, but many don't. And the money disappeared very, very quickly. So it's easy to be judgmental, but I don't think that's necessarily fair.
And it's important to understand how that corruption exhibits itself. So a few years back, Richard and I had this "It's for You" program over COP. I think it was 28 at the time or something. Yeah. And we had these conversations with people in Pakistan. And one of the things that brought out about it is that there's massive overcapacity in energy. And the reason is because the government subsidizes people, have contracts to people, long-term contracts to deliver energy. So all these people build them up. And as a result, the government has to pay huge amounts of money for energy that's not used. And that's part of that corruption, because there are all these contracts going, how these contracts form, because you're my mate, let's build this power plant, it'll be good for the country, and then we can actually go and talk to the World Bank and other people that we're creating this. So those are the subtle ways in which corruption goes. It's not just the backhanded packet brown envelope that Richard gives to me. By the way, you.
Yeah, I wish.
I feel I'm missing out on something here that's going on behind the scenes.
No, but corruption at large is one of the most destructive elements you have for prosperity. Full stop. And I think clever societies that actually lasted a long time, they found a way of tackling it rather efficiently. And it was certainly one of the worst crimes you could commit, was acts of corruption. While I sense very much that in modern society it has been diminished as just another white collar crime.
Yeah.
And I think it's extraordinarily corrosive for society at large.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about this cost of doing business thing. I mean, like, and it used to be a high value, and I think the U.S. changing their position on how it looks at corruption from a government perspective. That's having a big change as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Most definitely.
Yes. Well, if I may I just read one other bit from this book?
I think you should.
That be?
Here you go.
You should. It is, after all, just out. So,
and I think it's relevant to everything we're talking about, and it's basically a prompt about money as well. So people make choices every day, important ones and trivial ones. Regardless of whether they're important or trivial, the choices determine how they thrive. But choices do more than that. Choices are how people interact with each other. They're how people make connections with each other and create the society they want. So your choices over your money. Think about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm just gonna call an audible here. I have no control of what's happening with StreamYard, but I think David, you do. So you're driving this this car as it goes over the edge, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking about actually how I looked at what we were talking today about in terms of resources and stuff like that, right? It actually is very similar to just trading, because I trade, and the rule number one is basically stay alive, keep
Yes.
your resources so you can be in the game, and
Yeah.
I think that's fundamentally it. Just have to. If people learn that lesson, and if I can remember it when it's pertinent as well, because I know those moments come up when you go like, I'll just risk too much, or I'll risk something, right? And time just basically is the ultimate teacher that says no. Ultimately, what you have to do is just stay alive, and that's the prime directive if you think about it, right? As a species, our job is to stay alive.
Yes.
And rise above, I think, some of the worst mistakes that we tend to make, and do better, right? But part of it actually is that we're going to make those mistakes. I think if you look at our lives leading up to this point in time, right, we've definitely done some things that were better because we made some choices that were bad in the past, right? And we make corrections for it. There are very few people who, for instance, just people. I don't think you end up in a place of success because you've had an easy ride all the way. Some people maybe have the momentum to drive them that way, but for the most part, I think people hit a wall, hit rock bottom, do something like that. And I'm not suggesting that we should have to burn ourselves on the stove to learn the lesson, but we are going to do that. I think in terms of climate change, the evidence is building, and we're going to come to a point where legitimately we're going to say, well, we've lost a country to water levels.
Yeah.
That's something to be worried about. I mean, in a sense, like what you were talking about Jamaica as well, and it's stark to think that in terms of a holiday destination, we may have lost Jamaica forever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's absolutely, and I can't reiterate what you say. The staying alive This really, really important, because we tend to look at risk in a way of saying, oh, this is how much I may lose, this is how much I may gain in those sort of terms. We don't look at it as, if I lose that much, how likely is that going to stop me from staying in the game? And that's the thinking. That's the part that Richard learned and I lived through. My first kind of finance job, I was in this fund that lost 90-something%, blew everybody's kind of bonuses away. I mean, this everyone else's, not just ours.
Steady.
Well, what do you think, Richard? Did you get paid?
I got paid to the last penny. No, but it was a momentous occasion, right? Because
this was LTCM 1998. Blew out the world's financial system. The Fed had to lock the heads of the 14 largest investment banks in the world in the room and threw away the key and says, "You're not coming out until you give the white smoke."
It was one of the worst mistakes ever done, in my opinion. This is first time that central banks started delving into what can only be described as moral hazard and got into the habit of picking winners and losers. Just let the capitalist system roam free. You will not have these kind of outcomes. But that almost warrants an episode of its own, I think.
Yes. And that's very important.
What Joe is describing is paramount. It's that's how we learned as species. We made mistakes, and it's like, that didn't work out too well last time. Let me retrace the steps and go down the other path instead. Oh, this turned out okay. I'm not going to keep going back to the stuff that hurts me. That's just evolution. And trading amplifies that by any amount you want. If I get hurt, I'm going to stop doing it. But the fact that it allows me to keep getting hurt means I'm staying in the game. I have to have the ability of staying in the game. I always like to think of it as clay court tennis. Just get the ball back and worry less about the winners. Just make sure the ball goes back. That's the only thing you have to worry about at this point. Just make sure you keep returning the shot.
Yeah.
Stay in the game.
Good advice.
Well,
maybe something going on. Yep.
I think what we can do is slowly make our way towards the exit, and we'll talk about. I think we've covered money quite well. I think as any murder mystery has probably told you along the way, always follow the money, and you can find the motivation for most things in the world. It's a strange thing that the insatiability. Like people talk about why we're built that way to never have enough. It's a design factor. It's a design issue. So I was talking to somebody about dopamine, right? How our brains actually need motivation, and essentially dopamine is what happens when you do something that is a bit hard, and you achieve it, and then it releases that, and we as human beings we thrive on that. We love that. The feeling that we get from dopamine is so strong. And that basically is why we keep moving and trying to get into bigger things, right? And I was talking to somebody who was having a bit of a challenge in terms of doing some of the things that were important. There's some things you do that are fun to do, and then the important things sometimes you forget to do. And what we need to do, what they needed to do, was really to change the game they were playing, so that doing the difficult or doing the important thing was then translated into doing the difficult thing, so that when they did that difficult thing, which was the important thing, then they got a kind of a dopamine hit as well.
Yeah.
So if I could share this little moment that I had yesterday, and it produced that kind of hit for me, which was great. I was at the fridge late last night after I'd been staying up late and way past bedtime. So that was one sin I couldn't undo. But what I usually do is I go to the fridge, I open the door, and I look in, and I see something delicious, and I go, I'll have you, thank you very much. I turned that into a challenge, and then I said no, and I felt really good about that. So it's about trying to get, I think, the people at the highest levels of society, who are highest level of achievement in finance, to figure out other things to get themselves interested in, so that they can get their dopamine hits elsewhere instead of just making more money.
Yes, I think that's really great. When there's another part to it that's kind of along the way about the difficulty and how you're drawn into all these things that you can do, and it reminds me basically the other side, the other part of thinking about that is never get into a room that's too big for the number of exits it's got, because when that room gets up, you never get out.
Oh yeah.
It's very sound advice, actually. And it applies
So
in many of my
inadvertently, in the
stories.
absence of, it sounds like in the absence of Andrea, the show has turned into a trading show.
Yes, it has, hasn't it?
Shocking, but
Yes. Okay. Well, I'm going to have to go too. So it's been fantastic.
Let's round off with a very quick usual thing, which is what is distracting you. So, David, you have to go. But hang on, David, you're holding the keys to the car, so we're going to have to just round off very quickly now. So, what's distracting you, David?
What's distracting me? Why don't you get around that, and then I'll come back. Actually, obviously, my book has been distracting me, so that's been distracting
us as well.
And yeah.
Okay, Richard.
Mostly my illness has been a huge distraction to what should have been a really busy week, but turned out to become a bedridden week. David's book is a distraction. Mine hasn't arrived yet, which is a bit perplexing, but it's
well, I wrote it.
Well, it's a rural area, so yeah, we tend to have a little bit slower delivery, I found out in general. But those have been my two main distractions, to be honest.
On a related note, I'm just going to recommend everyone go get your flu shots. I've had myself. I've become sick, but after having a flu shot, and I found the flu to be not as much of an event for myself personally. In terms of what's been distracting me, I've been into this series that's by the creator of Breaking Bad. It's a new one on Apple called Pluribus, and I can hardly describe what it is without giving away too much of the idea. But it's one of those things. Just imagine if you are in a world where you are the only one who thinks that way.
Ooh, that is my world.
Okay.
Oh, they made a series about me. Wow.
I think you'll enjoy it. It's a pretty interesting thing. If you're a fan of science fiction and figuring out puzzles, there's actually something in that. So if the show Severance caught your interest, this will be akin to that with a little bit.
Very interesting.
A little bit more action.
Yes.
Pluribus.
Yeah. Pluribus. Yeah.
Okay. On that last one.
Right.
Pluribus.
All right, David, we're back to you.
Back ourselves with it. So
Pluribus
is
audiobook.
My book. There you go. Thriving at Nature's Pace. Everything we were talking about.
Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks everyone for liking and subscribing. And till the next time you join us on the Shit Show, it's the three of us on behalf of Andrea as well, saying goodbye and thanks for watching.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Have a lovely weekend, guys.
So, did that end?